Everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network, people that I've known for a long time, people that I've only met through networking and through this series. So these are great leads to get to these books that have contributed the most to who they are as a person, as a leader, as a business owner, entrepreneur, whatever it may be. And in the series, I cover three categories of books. The first being a book that I haven't read, they're sharing with me. The second one is a category where we're covering a book that we've both read, whether specifically for the series or in our past lives before the series. The third category is when I have an author and or publisher on to talk about the book, the messaging, the tone, just to get that person out there to share that message that they want to share with the masses. And my guest today is Henry Woodman. And Henry is a Florida native and a graduate of the University of Arizona for his bachelor's and Nova Southeastern for his MBA. He's trilingual, speaking English, Spanish, and French, and is a natural entrepreneur. In 1984, Henry and his partner formed Woodmark Productions to pursue two of his passions, film production and travel. He and the film crew would travel the world producing travel films for leading travel destinations worldwide on behalf of major travel companies, including American Airlines, American Express, Eastern Airlines, government tourism boards, and leading international cruise lines. After a decade of travels, he settled in Santiago, Chile for 2 years to produce Machos, a local game show for the younger demographic. In 1997, he founded World Travel Vision, WTV, a content provider for internet travel and tourism. And WTV pioneered the production and distribution of digital brochures and virtual reality 360-degree panoramic photography. In 2004, Henry pivoted WTV to a technology company and formed Ice Portal, or ICE. ICE was founded to solve a problem in the newly formed online hospitality distribution industry, the problems of management and distribution of visuals to online distribution channels. ICE helps hotels and resorts manage and deliver their visuals to thousands of online travel-related websites. And in 2009, he exited that company. Henry's commitment found its roots in television and film production and earned him 4 local area Emmy nominations. Finally, in 1998, Henry acquired the rights to a book, which he just published and plans to develop into a series for streaming TV. And Henry had heard about this series, about how I try to get these books out there that have impacted people. We got to talked back and forth, learned about each other. Seemed only right to have him on for an episode just to dive into this particular book, which is going to be very interesting, and you'll hear why in a second. Look, it's. We were just talking about it before I hit record, where I either have somebody who's read a book of an author they don't know, or somebody that has written the book themselves. This is kind of in between there somewhere. But it's a new approach that we're going to take for this particular book. So, Henry, thank you so much for joining me.
Wow, John, thanks for having me here. That was quite an intro. The guy sounds like a stud. I'd like to meet him.
Right? All those experiences. He's a worldly guy.
Yeah, right. I don't think any of that will fit on my epithet, but you know what? Thanks. I appreciate that.
Hey, try to put it on there. Try to get the word out about what you did. That's, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Even before jumping into these questions, someone's legacy, what stands out, what they're remembered for. It's powerful. It's powerful stuff where, you can't sum it up quickly. You can't capture the emotion or the experience or the love for life that they might have had or not. Yeah, the power of legacy is just incredible. But diving into the questions, I read the bio. It gives this great overview of your experiences, Henry. But who are you today? Can you provide a little more about the work that you're doing in the day-to-day?
Sure. So I'll do a little overview. As you said, I'm relatively a hedonistic and opportunistic entrepreneur, meaning for the most part, until my last business, I just did stuff that I wanted to do because I was interested or it made me happy. Me,
Yeah.
right? And the first example that you didn't put, I'm in a laundromat in college in Tucson, Arizona, where I went to the U of A, and I'm bored out of my mind because I got a pocket full of quarters and I'm jonesing for Pac-Man. Right, this is 1979, and so I call every laundromat in Tucson. I said, "You guys have video game machines?" And of course they said no. Then I said, "Would you like some?" And show the revenue. And a couple said yes. So that was my first sort of dive into entrepreneurship. Had no idea what I was doing. Just wanted to satisfy my own need. But ultimately, that hedonism led to the travel films, and then an opportunity presented itself in Chile, which of course went from a dictatorship with Pinochet to a democracy and added new television station, and thus they needed content. So I went down there and pitched myself as an American producer, had an idea from a show, an idea from a show in the US that I ripped off, right? And produced a show in Chile. And then at some point, somebody introduces me to, digital editing. And I think this is the coolest thing ever, right? You can cut and paste scenes like a Word document. And I start and then I get a CD-ROM with a virtual tour that I can look up, down, and all around. And I thought, oh man, this is for the travel industry, because I used to do travel films. This would be too cool, which leads to World Travel Vision, as you mentioned. And then some of our clients, the hotels, would say, how do we get these virtual tours on this new World Wide Web thingy? I'm like, I don't know, send them a CD-ROM. I mean, I really didn't know anything about technology.
Yeah.
And as luck would have it, I said, well, let me see what I can do to help, right? So we got somebody to program something and send links with virtual tours to the travel sites. And then I realized that the real value isn't the nice to have a virtual tour, it's the need to have photos. And the problem was photos weren't being delivered because the early reservation systems, the legacy systems, which are still in place today, do not store and deliver photos, right? You go to a brick and mortar and there was a green screen with cryptic text, right? Now, if you go to any travel website on the planet, you see photos of the hotels that generally would have come from ICE Portal. And that was the business that I sold a couple of years ago. And that's kind of what led me to go full circle 40 years later, which is the whole book thing.
So is the book your time-consuming job these days?
Well, I wouldn't say time consuming, but it is passion and purpose consuming, because what I've done is the book was written over 40 years ago by my father, as you had alluded to earlier. And while I was in LA, with my dreams after college that I wanted to produce and direct movies, of course, that did not happen. I ended up, my sister called me and she says, listen, Daddy has this book. I was helping him move, and it's this like tribute to a friend. That's a love story. And I'm like, love story, Dad? That, it just does not compute, right? And so she sends it to me and I could not put it down. I was in tears and I went, oh my God, this is amazing, Dad. So I call him up. I said, I got to buy the rights. What are you going to do with this? He says, well, I really wasn't planning on doing anything. I go, good. I don't have a lot of money. I'll give you $1, right? And I'll buy the rights. And so then I thought to myself, how narcissistic and nepotistic of me to think that it's my dad wrote a great, world-class book. So I call a friend of mine who's producing a movie. His name is Doug. I said, Doug, you got to read this because it's my dad. And he says, Henry, I'm in the middle of a movie. I said, listen, I'm not in a rush. Take your time. Doug calls me 3 days later and he says, this was the most amazing story. I love this. We are meant to do this. I'm like, done. Let's produce a movie, right? Needless to say, he ends up getting, Vestron Video didn't do well on his distribution. He gets disillusioned. He goes into real estate. I end up going to Chile to produce Machos. And I say, Doug, one of these days we're going to do this, right? I go back, I do World Travel Vision, 20 years, I do ICE. And then finally I sell ICE. And I said, listen, when I sell the company, we're going to get back to this. But now instead of producing a movie, the world has changed and the opportunity now is for a series. We're going to develop a streaming series off of the concept for the book.
Now, Henry, before we dive into the book, a little more on you. Can you share with me, and you gave some insight into building off of the bio, your different projects, how you fell into things. Can you walk me through the beginning, like the first couple steps you took into your education or the workplace or your business endeavors? It might have been that laundromat, but what was it that, or you had mentioned college. What was it that kind of put you on that path in college, your major? What was it that really set the stage for you to begin your career?
So yeah, it's like the career is just a bunch of dots connecting along the way, finding the opportunities or the hedonistic pleasures. I mean, when I went to college in Arizona, I studied radio television because I thought at the time that's the world I wanted to get into. I didn't really learn anything except, chasing women and drinking. That was my hobby. So when I went to LA, I'm fairly young and naive, and I'm thinking, wow, there's a lot of, there's a lot of effort. You can't just walk in and produce a movie or direct a movie, right? What was I thinking?
Yeah.
So the opportunity came along to be what's called a PA, a production assistant on a travel film, right? And I thought, oh, that's cool. And then I got into that whole traveling thing because I like travel. I like film. It's not a 9 to 5 behind a desk job, right? And so after many years of, PA, sound guy, assistant director, eventually I get to, produce these things, which was great. But, after a decade of traveling, you're like, oh man, I just want to be in a bed for more than a couple of days and then not get up and leave. And that's when Chile presented itself with the opportunity, right? So I don't really think at any of those junctures I knew a lot about being an entrepreneur, because productions are generally, you sell a product. There's a beginning, pre-production, a middle, the production, and a post-production, the end, and then you deliver it and you go up, sell it again, or sell something else again. It's kind of the idea, beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
The TV show was a little bit different because it was a production company in Chile that did the support. I just came in as the executive producer and put it all together. And then, brought the idea and they put it all together, right? Then when I do World Travel Vision, again, it's me doing stuff. When I pivoted to go from virtual tour production to virtual tour distribution, I would produce and then distribute. And then we go to photos and I'm thinking, all right, this is an ongoing concern. This is something that requires, more structure. And, people would talk to me and they would say things like, you got to hire the best people. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't even afford to pay myself. And you want me to hire the best people? I don't even know what that means. Or you need KPIs. I'm like, I don't know what a KPI is, right? You need a vision. I'm like, well, how do you get a vision? I just want to make, money and succeed. And so during that beginning, when I realized I knew nothing, two things happened. One, somebody handed me a book called Traction, by Gino Wickman, which essentially changed my life in the sense that the light bulb was illuminated. It would essentially dumb it down for people who are starting a business and say, what's a vision? What's a mission? What's a culture? How do you do these things? How do you put all this stuff together? Right? What's a KPI? What's a scorecard? And I bought a copy and I gave a copy to every employee. At the time, there were only 6 of us. And I said, this is our new Bible. We are going to wrap this around in a month. We're going to get together and we're going to put all these elements together, which we did. Then I went back to the university, Nova University, to get my MBA in entrepreneurship, simply because I was giving a presentation to a bunch of CEOs, and around the room there were these MBAs, and I thought to myself, boy, imposter syndrome kicking in, man. These kids know more than I do. Who the hell am I? So I thought, let me just go back and get an MBA, which was great because when you're there and you're running a business and you're very interested because it's relevant, you learn, right? As opposed to, listen, I just want to get a degree and I want to leave and get a higher paycheck. Yeah, that's my only interest. It was very insightful for me, learning things like lean management and stuff like that. So the reality was I had to literally overcome the hurdles and the obstacles and learn from those mistakes, or continue to add elements to my tool belt to help me grow the company and scale.
So for you, because I'm always curious what it is that drives somebody, what did you go to undergrad for?
I went to undergrad as a radio television student. That was my major.
And where did that come from in terms of, at that point in your life, you're going to college, this is what you wanted to declare? Oh yeah, and you had mentioned that before, I apologize. What made you want to go into that? Like, what kind of kid were you that seemed like the path that you wanted to go down?
Oh, now you're really getting deep, John. So
oh yeah.
Years earlier, I was 16 years old, and my dad had convinced my brother and I and 3 of our friends that we could go on this great adventure in Honduras and look for a lost city. And we thought, that's so cool. We'd be like, Indiana Jones or something. And nothing could be further from the truth. But here we are, teenagers in the middle of a jungle. It was very frightening. We thought we were going to die. We had a plan to kill our guide. I mean, it was crazy. So what ended up happening was, after we came back, we found some ruins, but we didn't find this lost city, right? So they sent an ABC Sportsman film crew. And the crew had a young guy who was 24. He was the director. And they're traveling and they're having fun. And I'm thinking, man, this is what I want to do, right? At the time, I'm thinking architecture, but at 15, I got an internship, and I found out that you needed math to put in like electrical and plumbing and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, I just wanted to draw pretty pictures, right? What do I know? And so architecture went out the window. And then I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to travel, and I want to go out with the family and put these creative things together. So that was the litmus. That was the fire that was set, that I went to college thinking, yeah, I'm going to get into the film and television business.
So did your dad go with you to Honduras, or did he just
No. We thought he sent us there to get rid of us. It's like, these kids are getting to be too much of a burdensome expense. Go to Honduras, look for a lost city. I know you're never going to come back because there's poisonous snakes and all kinds of shit that will kill you. And, I don't care. We had this delusion while we were there that, is this a plot for our old man wanting to get rid of us?
So when it comes to your dad, he's the author of the book that we're going to get into in a couple minutes. Can you tell me a little bit about him? I mean, just the fact that he would suggest that to you just shows you just a glimpse of the kind of man he was. But can you describe him? Give us a little more about him.
Yeah, absolutely. He was a total adventurer. He, when you think back, it's 1976. I mean, there were not the guardrails that we have now about, oh my God, you can't leave the neighborhood, you could get killed, Shit. Put the kid on an airplane and drop him into the middle of the jungles of Honduras, and good luck, I'll see you in 2 months, right? My dad.
Is that how long you were down there?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my dad was he was a book writer. He wrote several nonfiction books about travel, air travel bargains, discovering Yucatan, stuff like that, right? He was also really interested in archaeological things. He wrote a book called Ancient New World and all the different ruins. He heard these theories about a lost city in the jungles of Honduras, right? He was also the president of the International Explorer Society. So this was his passion, if you will, right? And so these theories talked about this, white city flanked by two monkeys with golden faces, and there was all this riches and stuff. And so we get there, and the Indians say, we will not go to where they say it is, because if you get in and you enter the lost city, you will die a violent death. And we're like, oh, great, we're gonna get cursed. So yeah, he was a world traveler, did some book writing, had travel advertising, worked with airlines, and had a passion for archaeological digs.
What about your mom?
My mom was, she was kind of a hedonistic, kind of like me. They were divorced. My parents were divorced when I was like 5. So we lived with our mom, but then we spent weekends and, sometimes would travel with our dad. She really didn't work. She kind of raised the kids and, kept complaining that she never had enough money and, that type of thing. So she was more a raise the kids and, old school German raising.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it just every kind of piece of information you gave me about the work that you're doing. Okay. The book is written by your dad. And then you mentioned how he sends you and your friends down to Honduras. So I ask about him. And then obviously logically got to ask about your mom, just to kind of get an idea of your experience as a kid. So my next question is always, how do you reconcile who you were as a kid to who you are now? Does it reconcile? Does it make sense? Not that you knew this is where you were going to end up, but that it makes sense from your personality, your experiences as a kid, that this is what you're doing.
Yeah, I think so. When you're I mean, first of all, I got to be incredibly cognizant of the gratitude I have for being born a white guy in the US in the 60s. I mean, I was born in 1960. So, I mean, to be honest with you, how bad can I fuck that up? Right. If you
Mm.
have a little bit of determination and stamina and discipline, you got a good opportunity here. Right. And I had a lot of discipline and energy, if you will, not always directed towards business or entrepreneurship, but I always felt like, listen, I don't have far to fall. There's opportunities all around. If this doesn't work, I'll pivot and do something else. So I always believed I would do well. I didn't think I would do as well as I did with selling the company, but I think that was just sort of dumb luck and perseverance and preparation.
Henry, I always did, well, not always, but I've always been curious as to someone's abilities, their capabilities, what they bring to the table. Only recently have I added this question to the mix. What do you consider your superpower? Because
You know,
I think it's important for people to, when I'm working with clients, when I'm working with students, to understand what they're good at. That it's not ego, it's not overconfidence, it's not, a Hail Mary um, effort of bravery, but to know what they're good at, how they stand out against other people. So I'm curious what your superpower is.
yeah, that's a good question. I would have to say it's probably grit, grit and discipline, meaning, I don't really see the failure thing. I mean, I get the whole pivoting stuff, but when I get into something, I'm like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. If it's not working out, I'm going to find something else, and I would tell people jokingly, listen, if this doesn't work out, my next question would be, do you want fries with that burger? So we got to make this work, right? There is no B, right? So I think the grit, but evidence too by forcing myself to go back to school while I'm in the middle of working, by mortgaging my house and, putting everything on the line multiple times, coming close to bankruptcy and thinking, you know what, I just need to do this. This is the grit because I don't know what else I could do. Not that I want to work for somebody, but I just don't think I'm cut out for that. I had, right? But I'm thinking, all right, you got into this, finish it, man.
Where do you think that comes from? Your grit?
Swimming. As a kid, I was a competitive swimmer. And so you get to the point where you understand the discipline of having to get in, even on days when it's freezing and cold and raining and stuff, and swimming and then, persevering. And I think that instills self-discipline, even though you're forced to swim in many cases, the coach is yelling at you, but eventually that you realize that helps the mental fortitude, right? So I give a lot of that to anybody who does competitive things in group settings younger, because it helps the mental fortitude and the grit and the discipline later.
What years was that? Or how old were you when you were swimming?
Wow. I started swimming in 1966 when I was 6. So, for most of my life, I was swimming, even got a water polo scholarship. But then after college, I quit thinking, man, I'm so over this swimming thing. Maybe 10 years went by and I thought, this is probably the best thing to keep my butt mentally and physically focused. I still swim today.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I guess that's a good question to ask people that I have on here, just because I think it is important for somebody to be able to explain how they stand out from other people, and just the experience of, or the story you tell of your swimming and how it applied, and how many people may, young kids, maybe even teenagers, yeah, I've been swimming for 3 or 4 years. Maybe they don't understand that the work that they put in is grit that they can apply to other
Yeah.
areas of their life. They don't see that transferable skill, that knowledge, that experience. Like you said, it may be a coach telling you to get your ass in the pool, but after a certain while, like that muscle memory of just doing the work, getting it done, you can apply it in other places.
Yeah. And, listen, at the time, I would not have looked back and go, oh, yeah, swimming really helped me. But I think that
Yeah. At this
when you,
point.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
talk to a lot of entrepreneurs as well. And I say, okay, well, you need a couple of things. Obviously, you need luck because first, you got to have a little bit of talent, right? you got to be prepared, meaning you have to have that discipline. You have to create the structural foundation stuff. You need to prepare for opportunity, and you need to be lucky. Because if you're standing on the corner and you're lucky and you're prepared, you may see opportunity. If you're not lucky, maybe not. If you're not prepared, maybe not. But you have a better chance with what talent you have to prepare and be lucky and hope for opportunity. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, I like asking that question, learning even a bit more about who you are, what drives you. Next question before we jump into the book, Henry. What does leadership mean to you? What does great leadership look like?
Wow. I would have given you a different answer a decade, even 2 decades ago. Oh, you need to be like a managerial type, right? Leadership really is a coach, in the sense that you're certainly not the best to play those roles, right? I don't know anything about writing code, nor could I do the little minutia of the operations from day to day. So, I think that as a leader, you need to be cognizant of raising the people around you and saying, listen, clearly here is where we as a team are going, right? We're going to row the boat in this direction. Now, there may be high waters or there may be challenges. So ultimately, we want to get here. And we're going to revisit that a lot and see if that's still the ultimate destination because, could pivot. So I think the leadership thing is clearly identifying who you guys are, where you're going, what we're about, and how we're going to get there as a team, right? And as a coach, you sit on the sideline and you hope these people know where, it's like I would look at it and say, listen, as a football team, you don't just say to the guys, all right, guys, we're going to go down and we're going to win. All you got to do is score points. How the hell do we do that, right? Is it a pass? Is it a play? Is it up the middle? Is it around the side? I mean, who's getting it? Tell me the plays, right? Give me the structure. Where are we blocking? So once you break it down and you say, okay, you're responsible for this and you're responsible for that. Here's where we ultimately want to go. We may not get a touchdown right away, but we're going to go along the way to the goal, which is the end zone, right? And it's the same thing, in my opinion, in business and leadership.
No, great answer. Henry, at this point, we can jump into the book. You'd already kind of gone into how your sister found the book and your dad kind of explained it. But can you give a little more about the book? If he told you how it came to be, when it hit him to write the book, anything you want to share about just the origins of him coming up with the book itself?
Sure.
And if you want, you can give the title of the book. I don't think we covered that yet.
Yeah. The title of the book is called The Reincarnation of Marie, right? And I'll give you a little bit of an overview. Marie is actually a real person. Her name is Marie Bashkirtsev, and it is a woman who lived in the late 1800s. Between 14 and 24, she wrote every single day her journal, right? She wrote in a journal. She died at 24 of tuberculosis. 2 years after her death, her mom publishes her journal, and it becomes an international bestseller. I mean, it's a sensation everywhere because she was a very good and passionate and intellectual writer, but she would write about things that at the time women didn't even talk about, masturbation and sexuality and reincarnation and stuff like this, right? So getting back to the point, so my father, who was a travel writer, nonfiction stuff, archaeological kind of a guy, writes a book about a story that he was told from a friend of his in Paris. My dad died 14 years ago, so I never got the whole story of whether he's writing this as him, quote unquote, my friend, right? Or he's actually writing and telling the story about a friend who told him this, right? Because if you read her book, there are several passages where she says, you know what, I haven't found love, but in time, I know through time, I will find you, right? So 70 years later, this guy picks up the book, whether it's my dad or his friend, I don't know. But he finds himself oddly drawn to this woman, her writing. She would describe herself in paintings, and he would go to the museums and he would see the likeness of this woman in the paintings. And he finds himself attracted to her in a way where he's comparing this dead woman to dates he's on. And he wants to go back and keep reading her journal, right? And eventually he goes to her tomb. So I'm not sure if it was my father with his, love, fascination with this dead woman, or if a friend really did tell him. And that's kind of the basis of the story.
Yeah, it's kind of like the original asking for a friend kind of situation where you don't know if it is your dad or the friend.
Right.
God. And I don't know if you explained yet while we were recording, but what was the other writings your dad had, the other books that he had published? I know it was a lot of travel, nonfiction, anything else in that cachet of
Yeah,
bestsellers?
he did a lot of stuff in the 1960s, air travel bargains. Before and that's why I also knew the travel industry and I liked the travel industry. Before the airlines had dynamic fares, I mean, everything was here's the fares for next year, right? It would stay that way for a year. It wouldn't change every 5 minutes. So he writes a book called Air Travel Bargains and good deals for airfares in different places going around the world, right? You could buy a book, right? And so he published this every year for many years, and they were bestsellers because people wanted to travel and they wanted to see where they get their best airfares, right? And then he got into other books about destinations. We lived in Key Biscayne, Florida, so he wrote a book on Key Biscayne. He wrote
Yeah.
Discovering Yucatan for the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. He wrote about Ancient New World, about archaeological digs in Latin America. So he wrote a lot of things that were of interest to him and then travel related. He was interested in archaeology, and he writes a book on Nazca, and he gets a tetrahedron shaped balloon and he flies a balloon over the lines of Nazca. This is in the mid 1970s to
Wow.
prove that the ancients could have flown there. And then it was on, a bunch of publications and stuff as well. So that was his fascination.
So when it comes to this, Henry, and you find this book and you ask your dad about it, you don't have to go into personal details, but what was that when you read something like that and it was very different from the other writings that he had put out? How did that hit you? What was your reaction? Yeah, anything at all to kind of describe how this book stood out to the father you knew before you had even read it?
Absolutely. So my dad was, I'm going to say he was a hedonistic whore. I mean, he just loved to have fun and he was a womanizer to the nth degree. So that was who he was, right? I didn't really see him as this tender, passionate, Romeo love kind of a guy. And from the books I just described, travel advertising and discovering a city and then archaeological digs, there's no romance there, right?
Yeah.
So what you know of your father is this pretty much factual type nonfiction writer, right? So when my sister's helping him move and she looks at it and he says, yeah, it's a tribute to a friend. This is how he described it to her. What does that mean? She says, it's a love story. Love story, I think that does not compute. Dad, love story? Come on, right? So she says, can I read it? Sounds interesting. And he says, of course. And she couldn't believe it. And she says, Dad wrote this most incredible, passionate love story. I can't believe it. I'm like, yeah, whatever. She sends it to me. I'm in LA at the time, dreaming of, producing movies, right? So when I do read it, I was in tears. I could not put it down. I had to literally finish the whole thing. I was in tears and I couldn't believe it was my father, the guy I knew that was this, sort of cold-hearted, analytical sleazebag, if you will. Not sleazebag in a bad way, but womanizer, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, it seemed like a disconnect, right? How did this guy, it must be something that was inside that he just didn't want to show the world, it's very superficial as,
I mean, plus his generation,
exactly.
macho, stoic, not talking about your feelings or anything like that.
Yeah, ex-Marine. I mean, that's exactly right. He had that man's man thing going on, right?
So, I mean, so once you've had a chance to read the book and you come back to him, again, you don't have to personal conversations with your dad, but what was that? What was in general? What was that? What did you say to him, or what did you ask him? Were you like, "Who the fuck is this? Who is it? Who wrote this?"
Well, I knew who wrote it, but I didn't really at the time. Listen, I'm
I guess
20.
in so many words, like, how do you express to him? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Where did this come from compared to everything that you're known for writing? And again, his generation very kind of hold the cards to the chest. Maybe he wasn't too expressive, or maybe he didn't share too much. But I'm just curious what you got out of him in terms of that was your writing in the past, and this is just completely out there.
Yeah. You know, I didn't have the forethought to ask that deep of a question because I was blown
Yeah.
away because of the fact that, listen, I didn't read my dad's books like travel advertising, air travel bargains, or, discovering Yucatan, or, any other stuff like that, because it didn't interest me, right? The fact that my sister read this and she was blown away, I knew what my dad wrote, right? I knew he wrote the non-fiction, travel related, things like that. So this was a complete departure. And when I think back, this is why the air quotes of what was it him that was his feeling when he read the book, because he was a voracious reader. He liked reading, right? Did he pick up the book and then write his story as if, my friend, right? And I never got that answer. I feel like, there's this superficial side and then there's this deep side where you feel like, oh my God, I found my soulmate. Problem is she died 70 years earlier. Wow. Because if you read something and you go, she's the perfect woman, she's meant for me, and she's saying, I'm going to look for you. And then all of a sudden you write about it and you have all this passion, and maybe it's in your mind. Maybe it's just the missing piece from that superficial life you lead on the outside, but on the inside you feel this. I don't know the answers to that, but I suspect there was a lot going on behind the scenes that wasn't revealed on the superficial in front of the scenes.
Yeah. Henry, so what do you take away from that? Obviously, in this series, we cover books, the lessons that people take away from these books. Uh, Even though it is a historical, you said nonfiction, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a nonfiction. I mean, it's based on a true story.
Yeah.
Marie actually wrote the journal. Whether or not my father was the guy who, or his friend, but we know that all of the stuff that preceded that, we don't know if she actually did reincarnate. So at the end, the story goes on where he finds, oh my God, I've fallen in love with a dead woman. I got to get out of here. I can't be in Paris where all of these things remind me of this dead love I have, right? And he comes back to see a piano recital because his sister has asked him to come back, and he's on leave. At the end of the day, he then believes he has found her reincarnation. She speaks the way Marie would have spoken. She dresses like her. She answers the questions. She has the same sort of passions and loves and interests and tastes for music and painting. And she's like, oh my God, it's her reincarnated. She's come to me. And that's kind of the belief that this is a reincarnation, which is the reason, we wanted to make this a movie. Now that we go deeper into streaming,
Mhm.
the working title is called Slippin', which is sort of a play on slipping through time, be it reincarnation, be it the metaverse, be it, time travel or whatever. The questions that we ask ourselves regularly as people is, why are we here? Is this all there is? Are there soulmates? Does karma exist? Or sins of the father? And we
Yeah.
obviously don't answer those questions because who the hell knows any of this, but we pose the questions about, if we have a soulmate, do we see him every lifetime? Probably not, right? Does love and hate two sides of the same coin? Is there an adage to that? And is there something about this whole karma stuff where, we're paying back for something we did right or wrong in a previous life? And so we take a lot of the people in Marie's era in the late 1800s, and we know they existed, like Guy Maupassant, another writer, Marie and her family, and we see how those lives intersect and interact with the current protagonist's lives and how they affect what happens, right? Good and bad. Because, we look back and we go, man, I've been dealt a shitty hand. Oh, was that karma from a previous? I don't know. Right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of the sort of paranormal, uh, historical fiction, paranormal romance thing. You're in love with a woman, she's reincarnated, or is she not? Or that type of thing.
So yeah, where I was going with that, and you kind of answered it there, but just to clarify my question, what kind of lessons do you think people could take away from that? So even though this isn't a typical book that I've covered, whether it was leadership or self-help, whatever it is, again, it's got more of that novel aspect to it. I think there are still lessons that somebody can take away from such a poignant and deep story, love story, right? What kind of lessons do you think people can take from that book in terms of awareness of life, awareness of love, whatever it may be?
Yeah. Thanks, John. I feel like, I'm a politician. You ask me a question, I give you another answer. I'm sorry. I'll answer the
Uh,
question. Takeaways. Okay, I got it. No politics. um, I think the takeaways are that love is a precious thing, and that the big questions in life persist. It's kind of a bittersweet reality when you read her journal. By the way, her journal is called "I'm the Most Interesting Book of All," which is really funny. And she does write knowing that she's dying. She knew she had tuberculosis. She knew she was going to die young, right? But she writes poignant stuff. So when you read some of those sayings, and you'll also read it in the book because he expresses it, you ask the questions like, is this all there is? I think the takeaway is, why are we here? I mean, that love conquers all. Does love conquer beyond death? Are there things, we are such a tiny, teeny speck of a grain on a grain, a speck on a grain of sand in this massive ocean of the universe. And do we really think that we're that significant, or is there all this interactive stuff? Is there a metaverse? Is there reincarnation? Are there loopholes? I have no idea, but I think when you read that, you ask the question of, okay, is there hope, right? What happens beyond this?
yeah. No, and you had answered the question, but I knew you expanded on it here beautifully. So I wanted to ask you that targeted question about the lessons, and I think you answered it beautifully. Um, in terms of your writing, Henry, what kind of writing have you done yourself? I'm curious. Is your father a writer? As your father, a writer and author, yourself a business person, entrepreneur? What kind of writing you've done? What kind of writing you look to do, if any? Maybe inspired by your old man.
Right? Let's see, spray paint on a wall in a subway. No. Um, my my father was a great writer. My brother is a great writer. He's actually written a story on this jungle thing, the search for the lost city in the jungles. The only things I have written, I wrote a book called How to Sell Travel on the Internet, which was a self-promotion for my business, 25 years ago or something. And it was really to hand out at trade shows and to get speaking gigs. Oh, I'm an author, right? But I don't consider myself a talented writer like they were. What I would write now is probably, a pitch deck for promoting the series. I do not think that I would get into authoring a book. It's, for some reason, it's not a passion of mine. I much prefer bringing it to life in the film and TV sense, right?
Fair enough. Fair enough. Henry, I think before you had mentioned the book Traction by, was it Gino Whitman?
That's correct.
Uh, what I tend to ask some of my guests is, what book has inspired and made an impact on you? Obviously, you referenced that one. Are there any ones that stand out as a solid foundation contributing to you? Just something that stands out, profoundly impacting who you are as a business person, as a human being, whatever avenue, whatever area you're operating in.
Yeah, I mean, the classics like Think and Grow Rich obviously gives you some perspective on how you're going to treat people. But from a business perspective, the book that Gino Wickman wrote called Traction was the one that by far changed the trajectory of my entrepreneurial journey, right? I know it was inspired by scaling up, and he was a disciple of scaling up, but he brought it to the point where you could clearly understand what it was like. He pretty much put all of the elements together on what foundational things you need to put into a business so that you can scale. The one thing that I would not agree or think does well, which is really challenging these days, is the marketing side of it, right? You can talk to me all day long about processes, procedures, KPIs, culture, vision, mission, stuff like that. But when you talk about marketing, it's so vastly different for the different businesses. But anyway, getting back to the book, I think traction is by far, I've read so many business books, Who by Jeffrey Smart, and, hiring, but the one that really put it all sort of succinctly, clearly, understandably for a small business at the time was Traction.
Awesome. And then just in beginning to wrap up, Henry, what are you up to these days? Is there anything that you might want to share about anything that you want to, whether it's about the book, anything that's coming up with the book, anything that people should keep a lookout for, anything at all? Floor's yours.
Sure. So, the book, as I mentioned, The Reincarnation of Marie, was the first step, right? So I finally, after 40 years, published that about 2 months ago, right? And the book is doing fairly well on Amazon, right? The idea was to get some awareness for the book and then create what's called a pitch deck to get showrunners. So the idea really is to take that concept, expand on it, the interconnectedness of former lives and reincarnation or slipping through time, and then produce a series for streaming on one of the streamers, right? And that involves getting smarter people, again, the leadership qualities, people surrounding myself as the executive producer that can produce it, showrunners, another writer. I mean, we have the pilot written, the director, and the cast. Then all of that, you put together a budget, you go to the streamers. So right now, the working title, as I mentioned, is Slippin'. But that can change at any time depending on who is deciding and what marketing people think it is. But to keep up on that, there is a website that we created called mariethestory.com, which is information about the book, about my father, about the series and my partner, and then obviously links at the bottom on my LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and shit like that.
Henry, what year did you guys find the, manuscript at that point?
When would we find it?
When did your sister find it? When she was helping your dad?
It was probably 1983, like good 41 years ago. So he wrote it before that, which means it's been written for over 40 years.
So why, I guess, if you can share, why didn't he publish it himself? And then why did it take so long to have it published from that point to now?
Well, the first one, he never intended on, he just wrote it kind of as an outlet, right? I'm going to write this story because he loved to write. He had a typewriter in front of him all the time. And then I don't know that he intended to make it a publicity or to publish it simply because that wasn't his genre. I mean, his genre was, nonfiction shit and travel stuff. And then when I read it and I said, listen, I want to buy the rights. He's like, yeah, whatever, fine. You want to make a movie? Go, have at it, right? Go ahead, son. So the fact that I got it meant that, he was going to wait for that because my intention was get some interest, show the book to people. They're going to go, oh yeah, that's great. Then we publish the book. It takes a year or two for a movie to come out. So, you got that leeway, right? Mm-hmm. Since I went off to Latin America and Chile and my, at the time, partner went off into real estate, we just put it on the back burner, right? It wasn't going to happen. So it sat on the back burner for 40 years, as I mentioned. And now that, we moved beyond our company, sold the companies. So now's the idea. And listen, opportunistically, I think the timing, because if you can do a much deeper dive into those intricate lives with a streamer than a 2-hour movie.
Yeah. Hey, it's better late than never. And yeah, I like the depth that a series can take you into. I mean, you can explore themes a little bit more than, an hour and a half, hour and 45, 2-hour movie. Right. So I'm looking forward to that when it comes out.
And, listen, if these are soulmates, they can die and get reborn every single season. You know what I mean? So if it's well received and they go, man, I love that concept. What a great series.
Yeah.
We need another season. You could go on
Oh
indefinitely.
yeah. I
You
mean,
get the
just
idea.
think about how if it expanded to different cultures
Yeah.
around the
Cultures,
world.
historical figures, cultures, gay, lesbian, I mean, it's limitless. I
Yeah.
mean, some people even think their dogs are their soulmate. I mean, who knows? You never know. They're teaching me something in this life, maybe in the next life, whatever.
Yeah. Hey, for me, as long as somebody's happy, to each his own. Seriously,
Now, I'm not
there's
saying
just
anything.
so much shit to worry about these days. Where if somebody's happy, that's all I want for the world.
That's exactly right.
And again, the book that we covered with Henry, he shared with us, is The Reincarnation of Marie, A Love Reborn in Paris from the Pages of History, written by his dad, Jim Woodman. Fascinating story. I love just the fact that your dad was known for reading this type of genre, and then he kept hitting a manuscript of something that was seemingly polar opposite to who he was or who he demonstrated.
Correct.
Um, I think that's just incredible. It says so much about that generation and some sense where it's kind of like you said, maybe it was just an outlet where he felt he couldn't express that. But it is interesting when you talk about your dad and how he chased the ladies, was a womanizer, and then had that depth to him in that outlet. That's
Yeah.
incredible. It just shows how much people don't show, and you think you may know them, and um, as an outlet, not expecting to show anybody, and he just kind of pours all that out there. So I'm looking forward to reading the book, and then just anything that might come out of it. Just that going diving deeper into that story if it does when it does hit streaming. So. Henry, thank you so much for introducing me to the book, sharing your dad's story with me, and sitting down for this conversation.
Thank you, John, and thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. And you're absolutely right. You never know the outside and the inside, what goes on behind closed doors.
Absolutely. And if there's anything that I might have missed, we're limited on time. But if there's something you're curious about or feel that I should have asked, let me know, and I could reach out to Henry, pick his brain, see what kind of insight, guidance, knowledge I can get back in return. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.